People calling to repeal the state's gas tax are launching a new campaign today to stop a massive transportation project. KPIX 5's Jackie Ward on efforts to stop the state's plans for high-speed rail.
California, this new initiative would also stop any construction of California's long-awaited high-speed rail system and instead redirect that money to transportation work. The current budget for the bullet train project is now $77 billion, which is significantly more than the originally predicted budget of $33 million. So this proposed measure would be on the 2020 ballot.
The average cost of building and maintaining roads in California is 3.4 times higher than the other 49 states average. I mean, that's absurd, absolutely absurd.
And why do you think that is? Are people just pumping the books, trying to get money out of the government, and they're just paying more than what they should be for what other states would be paying?
The primary role of government in California is to meet the needs of the unions and the other special interest groups. And so the important thing is to pay great, lush salaries for work being done, for projects being done, and that all passes through to the hapless consumer and the taxpayer who ends up getting this bill. And as Carl says, this is a regressive tax. This is going to hammer everybody, and it's unfortunate. I actually like the concept of a gas tax, but a gas tax should be for roads. Well, what they do is they use roads like Lucy used her football. This time you can trust me. They've done this before. They said, we're going to spend it on roads. They don't. They spend it on transit. That's a big thing. And when I say transit, I mean rail. That's where almost all the money goes high-speed rail and local rail. In L.A., they had a 30-year period of time. The LA Times looked at this. From 1985 to 2015, they spent $9 billion on mass transit, almost all of it on trains. At the end of 30 years, with a city that continued to grow, they have fewer riders on the trains 30 years later.
It sure looks like the future, an animated version of California's high-speed rail. And it sounded really cool, too. LA to San Francisco at more than 200 miles an hour. No planes, no cars, no fuss. That's why Californians voted for it back in 2008, passing a $10 billion bond measure for a train that was projected to eventually cost $34 billion. Keeping them honest, it's now 4 years later. Not a single track has been laid, and a bombshell report was dropped on California's taxpayers last fall. Their $34 billion train would actually cost closer to 3 times the estimated amount.
The new business plan puts a cost estimate of about $98 to $118 billion.
It was a shocker. 3 times the estimated cost. And guess what? You, the federal taxpayer, might be on the hook for a big chunk of it. We'll get to how that's possible in just a moment. But in California, the sticker shock caused yet another change in accounting, a big turnover with California's High-Speed Rail Authority Board, and yet another rethinking of just where the train will go and how fast and how much it would cost.
Today, we are releasing the revised plan.
In a press conference, a new route, a new slower speed, and a new cost estimate, now in the neighborhood of $68 billion, still twice as much as originally sold.
There's no question that the costs have gone up.
Dan Richard is the new chairman of California's High-Speed Rail Authority and co-author of that report that sent the high-speed rail plan, well, slightly off track.
That report was a draft. It was intended to engender comment. It did that rather successfully. And we're looking now at how we revise the plan and strengthen the plan and go forward.
But that is also very troubling. It turns out the latest plan could be for a much slower train, not actually the high-speed futuristic cartoon California voters approved 4 years ago. More of a hybrid that goes slower, makes a few more stops, and doesn't quite deliver the LA to San Francisco promise of just a few hours. And that's not the half of it. The High-Speed Rail Authority Board is doing everything it can to rework numbers and routes to justify spending tens of billions of dollars on a train that may be a huge economic blunder that few want to ride.
Every infrastructure project has the potential to be another Solandra, right? Whether it's high-speed rail or whether it's a bridge to nowhere. Right? The construction costs can overrun like that, and that's especially true in California, where our permitting and approvals process is tough.
Does all this have California rethinking its plans? Absolutely not, says Rail Board Chairman Dan Richard, and for one reason. They've already got the promised $3 billion of your tax dollars in federal stimulus. It has no intention of giving back the $3 billion already promised or the billions more from California voters.
So let's be very clear on this point. We have $6 billion to build the foundational segment.
Even if that foundational segment turns out to be a high-speed rail, well, to nowhere.
Could this really end up being a train to nowhere?
You know, this foundational segment really is basically going to run, Anderson, from Fresno to Bakersfield. That's 130 miles long. It's going to take 5 to 6 years to do it, just to finish that portion, which is not going to be a high-demand route. The fear is if the cost overruns, which critics say are inevitable, will be so high on just that one portion, support is going to fade away, and that's what's going to be left, a train to nowhere.
This could be a very fast train connecting Los Angeles to San Francisco, and voters approved it.
Yeah, that's right. Voters did pass it back in 2008, but support has been fading as more and more people get details of the project. You know, Orange County was pretty much eliminated from the rail line altogether in this latest attempt to save money. It appears the new version of the high-speed rail is actually going to be a little slower. And completion for all of this, Anderson, is 2028. It's going to be all about the billions and billions California is going to need to finish this project by 2028.
I'm sorry, ma'am, it's a $68 billion project. If I could have
No,
perhaps
thank you.
a minute
I
to
would
speak,
appreciate
it
if you would
terrific.
submit your comments. We only have about 2 minutes
I'm sorry,
left.
but it's a project,
and
the
there are
largest
people behind
project
you.
in the United States history, and if I could have more than a minute of your time, I would really
I'm
appreciate
so
it.
sorry we don't have the room.
You recently attempted to speak at a hearing in Sacramento about the high-speed rail project. What happened at this hearing?
Well, it was something I would imagine would be akin to what you'd find happening in, some kind of North Korean parliamentary event where you get up to speak after 59 minutes of having the bureaucrats speak and say nothing. It was just they had to do this because the law mandates that they go before the legislature and say, here's what's going on. They spoke for 59 minutes. The chairwoman, Bonnie Lowenthal out of Long Beach, said, well, we only have a minute left where this room has to be turned over to another group, so we have a minute of public comments. Well, I got up, I was the first speaker, and said, ma'am, I apologize, but the largest, most expensive project in human history, I think deserves a little bit more than 30 seconds of our time. We had a back and forth, and essentially what they did is they tried to shut it down. Well, I stood around in that room for an hour, and that room remained empty. Finally, I left after an hour and a half. There was no other meeting. There was an attempt to keep the public out of this, not asking any questions that make people uncomfortable, and it was really quite remarkable. So they allowed about 30 seconds of public comments on it. They're lying to people when they say this is a 220 mile an hour high-speed rail. When the governor came in, Governor Brown, and saw that the price tag was in excess of $100 billion, he knew he was in trouble. This thing was taking on water. How do we change it? What they did is they went from a high-speed rail system to what's known as a blended system, where they have to essentially use Amtrak rails going through Los Angeles. You only get high speeds when you're in about the middle of the state, and you get up maybe to 200 miles an hour. Everywhere else you're going 70 to 100 miles an hour, so it's not really a high-speed rail. They need to keep saying it goes 220 miles an hour so they can make that 2 hour and 40-minute time work out, but it really doesn't. And they say that they won't have any subsidies for it. Unfortunately, the governor let the cat out of the bag and said, of course it's going to have to be subsidized because our ridership levels are never going to be met. Therefore, we're going to have some subsidies. Now, he's since backtracked from that, but the reality is, as everybody knows, is that this isn't going to be making money. It's going to be taking money. If it was going to be making money, Wall Street and the private sector would be putting money into this.
We're underwater, $46 billion on our budget, and it was a continual 20, 40, 30. It just went on and on and on for several years. But the first thing I looked at were our state's financials, trying to figure out where we were, what we could do, what we could maybe do without, because that was really the issue. We were spending way too much, and we've been on a binge for at least 10 years. So, coming in during the crash, I happened to look at our debt and noticed high-speed rail, a recently approved bond, $10 billion, and thought, maybe we really don't need that right now. This has the potential it has such a huge impact on the entire state of California, Southern California in particular, because we are 2/3 of the population down here. This could impact all of our pocketbooks into perpetuity for years to come with debt, local financing, and everything else you can imagine. It will impact public safety, education, local transportation, and all the other things that you're trying to want for your cities, want for your counties, and you need to survive. This is that huge. The little engine that could. You might recall that the governor in his State of the State said that we had a little engine that could, the high-speed rail, chug, chug, chug. Well, it could bankrupt the state of California. What was promised to the voters, what 52% approved with that $9.95 billion bond, connects San Francisco to LA in 2 hours and 40 minutes nonstop by 2020. The state legislature approved $8 billion for the High-Speed Rail Authority, 5 years, no legislative oversight. $3.3 billion of federal funds expire in 2017. State match of 2.7 in debt for 100 miles of unelectrified track, no ridership or train set, somewhere in the middle of the Central Valley, starting in Fresno, either going north to Madera or south. There's no audit. We have fourth-level contractors reviewing contractors. We have no train specified. We have completion date has been extended and extended. The ticket price is now $100. Travel time is more than 3 hours, and this is a breaking point, because over 3 hours, people would rather drive or use other methods of transportation. So this is huge when it comes to ridership or ever being a true high-speed rail. And the governor acknowledges now, of course, it will have a subsidy. Every public transportation element has a subsidy. So, who's going to use high-speed rail? Now, this is what came out in Newsweek when we were talking about that. Supposedly, 39 million people will eagerly pay more than an airfare to travel slower. Okay? In 2010, Amtrak carried 29.1 million passengers for the entire year. That's about 4% of annual air travel. That's the Washington Post, and we're supposed to do 39 million riders. So, high-speed rail is the future, though. You've heard that. It's the future. It's how we're all going to go. Okay, so Japan, with the world's leading system, illustrates the financial devastation that high-speed rail can produce. For 25 years, Japan borrowed to build a system serving the ideal rail corridor, nestled along a single coast with a population of more than 75 million people. Ridership was artificially increased by high gasoline prices and one of the highest highway tolls in the world. That's from National Review. If you're going to install one, you should be reasonably sure there will be people around with an interest in riding your train. After all, a train running mostly empty emits a lot of carbon, and that's the Atlantic. So these things have been going on forever, and people across the nation and the world have been commenting on high-speed rail. So the train's rolling. Why should we object? The money's out the door. Why should anybody still care? Okay, the voters were deceived. That was ruled in court. The voters were truly deceived, and hence the Prop 1A lawsuit. Actually, the plan is that gas prices will have to increase to make this possible. We are the Golden State. We have all the resources, the people, the talent. We're just wasting it. And the way we were? Okay, back when Jerry Brown's dad and before was governor, you can see in 1961 our pieces of the pie, K through 12 education, higher education, other, but we had a huge slice here for transportation. When anyone talks high-speed rail, remember where we were, where we are, and what it's going to do to your county.
Voters supported the bond measure to pay for construction on the condition that the train would be self-sustaining. According to one recent estimate, the project's latest iteration would suck up at least $100 million in annual subsidies.
The ballot measure prohibits taxpayer subsidy, and that was an important part of convincing voters in 2008 to approve the bond measure.
In the meantime, lawsuits have multiplied, private investors have fled, and even the official price tag has nearly doubled, from $33 billion to $64 billion. When the legislature cleared the way for the Rail Authority to begin selling the voter-approved bonds in early 2017, the agency declared it a milestone. COP was livid.
It's deceit. That's not a milestone. It's desperation, because High-Speed Rail Authority is out of money.
You've got to do what you promised the voters, and you can't change that without going back to the voters.
Attorney Stuart Flashman has represented environmental and transportation groups in several lawsuits against the Rail Authority. He now aims to stop the project on the grounds that the agency broke numerous promises to voters.
They're going the wrong way. They're basically doing this in a way that is very inefficient and will not work.
Baruch Feigenbaum says that starting construction, even though there isn't enough money allocated to finish the project, is part of a deliberate plan to extract further taxpayer subsidies.
Their strategy is to get enough of it built so that basically there's going to be so much money sunk in the project that they're going to argue it's going to be cheaper to complete it than it's going to be to abandon.
This bridge is arguably the most visible piece of high-speed rail construction in California.
I think it's, for people who drive by here on 99, it's their first glimpse of high-speed rail becoming a reality.
Over budget and behind schedule, California's high-speed rail project is running out of money.
It's not that expensive. We can afford it. In fact, we cannot not afford it.
Voters were told 9 years ago the train would cost $33 billion. Today, estimates are twice that. Private contractors would pay a third of the cost. Today, none have invested.
It's the future, and it's happening right here in Fresno, California.
By starting construction in the flat Central Valley, Governor Brown hoped to save money and show progress. That didn't happen. Now critics point to plans to burrow under 52 miles of mountains. Yet the cost of tunneling under just one 13-mile stretch is $7 billion, or 10% of the entire project.
There's tunnels being built all over the world. We're not, the first country to, decide that we need to build a tunnel through the mountains.
Voters feel betrayed.
I think it should have to go back to the voters. One, the cost overruns. They're talking now that it could be $69 billion or more. They said the private sector would invest, and they have not.
The state Supreme Court found ballot language used to sell the project misleading. Ridership surveys inflated, ticket prices unrealistic, and financial projections unfounded.
If you're subsidizing the riders on high-speed rail, that means you're taking money away from the classroom and from our first responders.
The money won't go to fix the roads. We've seen a fraud in our gas tax fund, in that the politicians have raided those monies. Instead of fixing roads, they've been spending the money on transit, park and rec programs, farm programs, even general fund deficits. And nothing in SB 1, the gas tax, car tax increase, changes that. Politicians can continue to divert the money away from roads. And in fact, not a single penny is earmarked specifically for roads. They have a general definition about transportation. And when you have that general of a definition, you're going to have a lot of high-speed rail, a lot of transit, a lot of bike lanes, God knows what. What we want to see is a cost of living that's sustainable, and that's why we want to reject the gas tax by voting yes on Prop 6. And then we want to really earmark existing gas taxes and car taxes for roads. We pay enough already for good roads. That is the solution, not saddling working families with higher cost of living.